This was the game that changed the franchise forever. For better or worse, Cold War Zombies was here and the classic days that players used to know and love were gone. So much that had existed for the past 12 years was about to be left in the rearview mirror, and this once simple mode was about to be transformed into something that would shape the future of the community. Heralded as the rebirth of COD Zombies, Cold War was extremely controversial in its approach to modernising how players take on the hordes of the undead. It's fair to say that from the launch of this game onward, things would never be the same again, and whether that's a good or bad thing will depend on who you ask. In order to take a full deep dive into the world of Cold War Zombies and what it brought to the table, we need to go way further than just maps, Easter eggs and boss fights. Because this entry into the franchise was responsible for reshaping the gameplay of this beloved mode to its very core. So let's go on a journey of reflection, and in order to do that we need to start at the very beginning, because Zombies was moving in a completely different direction and this was the start of a brand new era. There is no doubt that Cold War Zombies brought a lot to the table, some good and some bad. But one thing that definitely can't be debated is that everything new that arrived with this entry into the franchise would shape the game mode going forward. All of this would become clear to fans very quickly, with a clear focus on cosmetics becoming obvious immediately. This was showcased to players very plainly through the fact that for the first time ever in Zombies, fans would not be playing as a set crew and instead would use operators. This allowed Treyarch to give players the ability to use all of their skins in Zombies. While some may consider this a good thing, it absolutely impacted the devs' ability to tell a great story and left many players feeling disconnected from the characters that they were battling the undead with. And in order to do that, players were given some of the biggest levels of customization they had ever seen. The idea of unique tailored loadouts is something that had been tested previously in World War II Zombies and other titles, but this was on a new level. The days of jumping into games of Zombies with merely a pistol and your skills were over, because now fans could decide exactly what weapons they wanted to spawn in with, along with a whole host of other major gameplay aspects. And one of the most game-changing of those was the new field upgrades. Although not necessarily entirely original, with it quite clearly being inspired by previous specialist systems, this mechanic would become a huge part of modern Zombies, giving fans access to a variety of game-changing abilities that will become life-saving in a number of different situations. Clearly, with this new fully customizable loadout system hugely altering the early round gameplay of Zombies, it was key that the devs implemented certain systems to avoid having players spawn in with ridiculously overpowered loadouts. And this concern was combated by the addition of weapon rarities. All guns that players arrived in a map with would be low rarity and become fairly useless pretty quickly. Fans would then need to upgrade their weapon's rarity in order to keep scaling up its damage to have a good chance of taking down the undead. And the only way to do this would be getting to grips with Cold War's new crafting system. Zombies would drop two new currencies for players known as salvage and rare salvage. The rare version of this would be used to upgrade to better gun rarities, without which fans had no chance of surviving. It wasn't the only aspect of crafting that would offer players a greater possibility of reaching higher rounds though. Using the same station, fans could use the standard version of salvage to create and upgrade armour vests for themselves, which would mitigate damage inflicted by the undead. And it's fair to say that moving forward in the modern age of Zombies, this would become a major part of the gameplay loop. Although obviously that was more defensive, the same standard salvage could also be used in a much more attacking way. For the first time ever in COD Zombies, players now had the ability to craft devastating score streaks taken straight from Warzone. Death machines, war machines, chopper gunners, fans had a whole host of new ways to take down the undead with this mechanic. But it's fair to say it was very controversial. Some loved this unique way to wipe out the horde, whereas others felt like it had no place in their beloved mode. But it wasn't the only new addition that Cold War brought to the table that some considered a huge negative. Although Juggernog may have made a return after it was disappointingly missing in Black Ops 4 Zombies, it came along with a totally revamped health system which completely changed how the mode was played. Zombie Slayers were now dropping into maps with 150 base health, which could be increased by Jug to give them a better chance against the undead. But it doesn't seem like an exaggeration to say that if you ask the majority of the Zombies community, they would much rather go back to the classic health system. And it wasn't the only thing with Cold War Zombies that the devs decided to change that was absolutely huge. Because with this new entry into the Zombies franchise, the perk limit was completely gone. Players were leaving behind the days of being locked to 4 perks per match. Nothing was off limits here in terms of what they could do. Players could repeatedly stack them up until they have every single one available. On top of that, a new version of the Wonder Fizz machine could be found within all Zombies experiences, where fans could just choose whatever perks they wanted to purchase without ever having to visit individual machines. The caveat for all of these changes, prices for each perk would increase with the more that you decided to buy. Not only that, but Zombies fans also got the biggest buff to movement mechanics they had seen in a long time. Also coming over from Warzone, like so many other things in Cold War, was the ability to mantle. For the first time ever, escaping the clutches of the undead was easier than ever before, as now you could vault over pretty much any railing or wall in the game to get away. And when you combine that with the addition of ammo boxes, it really felt like Treyarch were attempting to take Zombies in a much more casual friendly direction. Before the arrival of Cold War, it had never been this simple to refill your weapon. Most games never even let you do this, it was a max ammo or nothing. That was until World War II gave players the chance to buy it from the Pack-a-Punch machine, but even then you couldn't do it for wonder weapons. I think we can all agree this was absolutely game changing. And you could say exactly the same for the Rampage Inducer. This thing was a speedrunner's dream. No more slow build-up of rounds waiting for zombies to appear. This essentially eliminated any waiting around and players loved it. Just hit the Rampage Inducer and you could fly through rounds like they were nothing, as long as you could cope with the chaotic speed of the undead, that is. If not, players could always just get the hell out of there with the new Xfill system. Cold War added one of the biggest changes in the history of Zombies by allowing fans the chance to leave a game whenever they wanted. It was no longer all about surviving for as long as possible before eventually meeting your end. If players desired, they could now call in a chopper on specific rounds to extract them in order to escape the undead and get hold of bonus XP. Out of game though, Zombie Slayers actually got access to a completely fresh system of permanent upgrades which could be applied to nearly everything in the game. Merely through playing, fans could get hold of Ethereum crystals which could be cashed in to unlock permanent upgrades for various skills and features, and it applied to a huge amount. Field upgrades, perks, weapon types and so much more. Finally, players were being rewarded for their in-game time by being given stronger versions of pretty much everything for their loadout. And that's exactly what they would need when jumping into the new Onslaught mode. Disappointingly, as a PlayStation exclusive for around 12 months, loads of people totally missed this Cold War edition. It seems fair to say this was more of a side mode than any kind of serious Zombies content, with it of course taking place on multiplayer maps and not something zombie specific. Although any kind of new mode is largely always a good thing, particularly when it doesn't take the place of main DLC. And with this being much more simplistic gameplay wise, focused around following an orb across basic maps whilst wiping out zombies, it made more sense to mention Onslaught here as opposed to its own serious breakdown like other maps and content, as in my eyes sadly it just doesn't have enough to it to warrant such an in-depth analysis. And there you have it. As you can see, even this many years after its release, it seems pretty obvious how much Cold War changed the Zombies mode as we knew it. It brought it into the modern day kicking and screaming, and whether fans liked it or not, things were changing in a massive way. And all of that would begin with the first experience available to players at launch, Maschine. The biggest reboot in COD Zombies history, a throwback to the birth of this incredible mode, the return of classic old school gameplay.
Investigate the site, contain the threat. Let's get the power on. Let's go!
Zombies have gone back to the drawing board in the biggest way possible, fusing the past and future together in an extremely bold way. There's no doubt it was truly polarising, but this journey was only just beginning. And so the most important question is, how good was Maschine? How do you reboot COD Zombies in the perfect way? How do you sell a whole host of brand new mechanics to old school players? You give them one of the most nostalgic visuals and atmospheres of all time as soon as they load into the launch map. As players dropped in, they were met with a comforting, heartwarming sight, the classic NOCK and Toten building. But this is COD Zombies, how comforting can it really be? D Maschine may begin with a bright, vibrant atmosphere and visuals that seem like the complete antithesis of NOCK and Toten, but it didn't last long. The dark, gritty and unnerving mood of the mode immediately came flooding back to fans upon entering the oldest building in zombies history. And just like that, the devs had managed to give us the perfect mix of modern and retro with D Maschine's atmosphere, and it didn't stop there. This theme of light versus dark is woven throughout the entirety of the map, from the main training area by the plane down into the underground lab. So much so that when players emerge from underground, they can often be blinded by the intense lights of the midday sun. I personally think the visuals on display with the Cold War Zombies launch map are genuinely phenomenal and some of the most impressive available throughout the whole of the game's life cycle. D Maschine succeeded in taking a COD Zombies location that 99% of us were hugely familiar with and somehow bring it into the modern day. There's always going to be trepidation from the zombies community when a brand new experience incorporates things from the huge history of this well-loved mode, and in order for that to not leave a bitter taste in the mouths of fans, it's got to be done very smartly, and this definitely was. The incredible thing about this map is that the amazing visuals don't end with what you immediately see in front of you. Once you arrive in the Dark Ether for the first time, this is where you truly appreciate the devs' hard work. There are very few sites more impressive in COD Zombies history than this. The Dark Ether looks absolutely incredible and honestly makes you want to spend all of your time here. The only tragedy is that when accessing this visually stunning reality, you're sadly on a timer and eventually get transported back to the normal world. And as impressive as the atmosphere is in the rest of D Maschine, it doesn't come close to matching that of the Dark Ether. Although there may be tons of familiar sights from NOCK and Toten to the famous ray gun, not everything is a throwback. The map fortunately brings a pretty insane looking new boss enemy to the table, the Megaton. Over the years, this big dude has been criticised massively by the community for being a bullet sponge, and a huge frustration because of its splitting mechanic where he'll break himself down into smaller enemies. I have to say though, I completely disagree with these views. I think this is a fantastic mini boss to take on with some great fresh new gameplay mechanics. After this many years of COD Zombies, to get a new enemy with completely different mechanics to things we've faced before should absolutely be praised in my opinion. Although definitely feeling unique, this monster hugely reminds me of the Panzer from Origins and Horizon, and that can only ever be considered a good thing. It fits the aesthetic of the map absolutely perfectly, and although it can quite clearly totally change the way a round needs to be played when it appears, I wouldn't consider this a bad thing. From my point of view, this is exactly what a true mini-boss enemy should be, showing up every so often to cause you some problems and give you a genuine challenge without overwhelming you by appearing too often. The Megaton may not be perfect, but given a choice between an enemy like this and a complete overabundance of slightly weaker foes as seen in Black Ops 6, I know what I would go with, and it's the big guy right here. This absolute beast is not the only enemy introduced in D Maschine, as the completely disgusting looking plague hounds rear their heads from the shadows in an attempt to frustrate players into madness. I actually have very mixed feelings about these creatures, largely due to the fact that I found the idea of them to be a bit lazy but also very understandable. The plague hounds are quite clearly just a slightly morphed version of the original hellhounds, and this is the part that kind of annoys me. They don't really feel that special, and for a huge zombie reboot like D Maschine, I would have preferred something totally new. However, that's kind of the point. This experience is supposed to bridge the gap between old and new players and to provide an enemy that seems familiar and nostalgic to many but also interesting and horrifying to others. Although I may not be a huge fan of them, I have to say the choice here was very smart, and I can't argue with the quality of the design because these things look absolutely disgusting in the best way possible. Fortunately, you can make very short work of them if you manage to get hold of the map's wonder weapon, the decompressive isotopic estrangement machine. Or die machine. Yeah, I see what you did there. Although this thing probably won't win any awards for best wonder weapon of all time in either the looks or usability department, there's no doubt it was a smart choice for this map. It's not massively difficult to get hold of, being available from both the mystery box and a pretty simple mini quest, which is of course useful for new players. But then anyone who's looking to take things to the next level has the option to upgrade it to one of 4 elemental variants. All of these aren't too far out of the realms of possibility for most players either, with every single one being needed for the map's Easter egg, but we'll get onto that later. The classic Zombies move of 4 different wonder weapon variants for 4 different players was the smart choice for this launch map, allowing anyone new to the scene to get hold of this mammoth machine and never be forced to miss out due to being too slow to find it. The fact that each version of the die machine has a pretty unique quest is a great addition, meaning that when needing to craft all 4 or perhaps going with a different choice each game, you at least get to take on a different challenge instead of the same steps every single time. There are however a few unfortunate drawbacks for these wonder weapons, with the electric variant being by far the most useful, kind of making the other 3 a little bit pointless if you're playing solo or not doing the Easter egg. And the other issue is that they are sadly just a bit underpowered. The reasoning for not making them crazy OP does make sense because technically these things have infinite ammo due to you being able to regenerate it by farming zombies, but I'm pretty confident that nearly everyone would have appreciated something a lot stronger for a launch map. I mean, they are called wonder weapons after all. But with that said, for me, the positives definitely outweigh the negatives, and the various versions of the Die Machine are a strong and integral part of the map. But they're not the only great addition that Die Machine brought to Cold War Zombies. Although clearly not entirely new due to this style of feature being used in previous games, I gotta say the challenge system is a fantastic gameplay mechanic. As far as launch maps go, it seems obvious to say that Die Machine is one of the more basic we've seen over the years, but at least this cool feature gave players interesting things to do other than going for high rounds or taking on the Easter egg. Especially when you take into account the risk-reward feature. If you decide to hold out on collecting your reward and push all the way to the top, you can get some genuinely top-tier loot from legendary guns, perks, and even the map's wonder weapon. As mentioned, these types of challenge systems aren't something that was first introduced in Cold War Zombies, but I was a big fan of how they implemented it with this interesting spin, rewarding you for your patience and hard work. The devs definitely made some great decisions with Die Machine, no doubt with the key aim of hooking a totally new audience while also paying homage to where this incredible game series came from. However, I definitely think sadly it has quite a few issues that hold it back from being one of the best ever. Most fans definitely wouldn't deny that one of the most important things about any zombies experience is the Easter egg. Of course, this wasn't always the case with more basic maps like Darice and Kino, but in modern times it's right up there at the top of players' lists. But that's kind of the problem here. Die Machine is a launch map and offers one of the easiest Easter eggs of all time. There's not necessarily anything wrong with a slightly more simple main quest if it takes place on what many would call a bonus map such as Liberty Falls, but it really needs to be accompanied by something much harder, and of course that would never be the case with Die Machine because it was the only launch map available. To put it simply, this main quest is just way too easy and short, with a large portion of the Easter egg being crafting all 4 variants of the wonder weapon. It's not to say that it doesn't have some interesting steps such as interacting with numerous ghosts and even having to trap both sides of a split megaton in order to reform it into a full one. It actually offers a pretty interesting story surrounding Dr. Orlov, with him recounting the horrors of his past, but overall it just doesn't give fans much of a challenge, at least to anyone outside of new players trying to take on their first main quest. The difficulty of the steps as you progress through the Easter egg unfortunately aren't the only issue though, as it goes deeper. There's only one pretty blunt way to put it: this journey culminates in one of the most lackluster boss fights in COD Zombies history, if you can even call it that. It is no joke to say that it is nearly impossible to fail this encounter. The only way to actually do that is being downed by pretty standard enemies you've been encountering all game. Orlov can't be eliminated or fail any steps no matter how long he's attacked for, and this just removes any sense of danger. Add on top of that a wonder weapon that can be constantly refilled by farming enemies, and all you need is a little bit of patience and it's a guaranteed win. The numerous megatons that appear are the most difficult part, but due to the huge open space and Die Machine being pretty strong against them, even they don't cause the player too many real problems. Yes, this map was a huge attempt by the devs to give zombies a massive reboot and quite clearly take the experience in a slightly more casual direction, but did it need to be this casual? I don't know about that. This final step unfortunately offers next to no challenge to anyone who is more familiar with zombies quests. It's almost like their enjoyment was sacrificed to make room for players with less knowledge. After you've succeeded with this admittedly easy challenge, there's one final thing to do: Xfill. Escape back through the map, avoiding bursts of bright blue light in order to make it to the chopper landing zone and get the hell out of here. And so, surely that ending cutscene is going to be pretty tasty after we fly away on that heli, right? No it isn't. It doesn't exist. There is no ending cutscene. Yeah, what a way to finish the first Easter egg in what you could have definitely called a brand new version of Zombies at the time. Talk about an anti-climax. It's not even just the main quest which seems totally lackluster with Die Machine, as that situation also extends to the side content. First things first, not all of the side Easter eggs in Die Machine are bad. It seems pretty obvious to say the coffin dance secret is amazing. It's iconic both inside and outside of Cold War Zombies and is probably one of the funniest additions in the whole of the game. It's incredibly easy to do and can even be worth completing for players who've already seen it, as it will also provide you with much needed loot and the chance of a free perk. It's not the only impressive secret in the map, with fans able to complete an extremely simple task revealing a huge monster hand that bursts out of a door and begins swiping at the air. But this is kind of where the fun ends though, because in terms of side content in this map, it's pretty non-existent. It's not that what is available isn't good, it's just that there isn't anywhere near enough of it. When you compare D Maschine to other zombies launch maps such as Terminus, Blood of the Dead, or even Shadows of Evil, the amount of side content on offer just doesn't even compare. The complete lack of it just makes the experience sadly feel quite surface level and perhaps even a little bit bare bones. Evidently the devs wanted all kinds of zombie players to spend a ton of time in this map, from casuals to more seasoned pros, and although they definitely managed to do that with this experience being pretty popular in the community, it feels like they could have done an even better job with that if they had spent the time to include some incredibly useful side Easter eggs and secrets that players would go back to even years later. Although quite clearly D Maschine is a map that many fans return to a long time after its release, I can't help but feel like it's missing something, and that something is pretty big. I'm talking about a literal section of the map. I don't know if it's just me, but this experience overall feels way too small. What does exist in D Maschine in terms of the play space is pretty impressive, but there just isn't enough of it. The map almost feels like you're about to enter an extensive underground base containing all sorts of grim secrets until you realise that what's below the surface is actually pretty small and basic. If you compare this to something like the Final Reich from World War II Zombies, it's not even close. Both have a creepy, mysterious bunker housing a decent portion of their play space, except that the Final Reich offers way more for players to explore, and it's honestly disappointing that D Maschine isn't able to meet the scale of that experience. It's not the only thing that is quite frustrating about this map, because quite clearly the experience is split into two major areas, above ground and below. So would Treyarch like to inform me as to why they didn't think it was a good idea to have more than one armor station in the entire map? If a player spends nearly all of their time above ground wiping out the hordes of the undead, why would they want to have to constantly travel to the lab in order to stock up on fresh armor every time it gets destroyed? Sure, there are crafting benches in the area near NOCK and Toten, but as this is the Cold War system, not Black Ops 6, the crafting benches can't be used for anything armor related, which leaves fans having to constantly return to the particle accelerator in order to freshen up the armor. It just seems really poorly thought out. Don't get me wrong, the idea of having an armor station in that below ground area is obviously spot on due to it being extremely useful in the final phase of the Easter egg, but it doesn't mean there couldn't have been a number of others closer to where the player spawns in. It really makes no sense. But the most baffling decision of all is one that not only affects D Maschine, but the whole of the Cold War Zombies experience. Treyarch made the strange choice to have you play as no set crew of characters, instead allowing you to play as soulless operators with no personality, and this heavily impacts the quality of the story being told. As mentioned, this would become a problem throughout the whole of Cold War, however, as it was initially a problem in D Maschine, it makes sense to talk about it here. Nothing really kills enthusiasm for a map story than arriving on the scene for some zombie slaying as some random battle pass skin with no backstory, interesting lore, or worthwhile in-game quotes. The only way the story is in any way saved with D Maschine is due to the characters who are giving you insights and information over the radio, such as Weaver. Many years later, fans would of course get to play as these characters in Black Ops 6, but they were sorely needed in Cold War Zombies 2. The lack of a real crew to play as is probably one of the weakest things about this map, as it just leaves you feeling massively disconnected from the experience you're part of due to your characters having very little connection to the people they're taking orders from, at least in terms of the story anyway. You just end up feeling like a tag-along in someone else's mission as opposed to being a major protagonist like fans did when playing as the famous Ether crew. One positive though for the story info is the addition of logs and radio transmissions to expand the lore surrounding the Dark Ether. Well, that is until you realise you can't even access some of this very useful story content whilst playing a game. Sure, you can collect this lore whilst taking down the undead and listen to certain radios, which is great, but in order to actually get a look at a big portion of the juicy information, you have to return to the main menu. Let's be honest, the vast majority of players are just never going to do this, so by default they just miss out on tons of story lore that actually helps to flesh out the universe you're playing in. The fact that the entirety of this awesome content isn't just in-game audio logs or radios is so confusing. This could have been a great way to expand the story whilst pretty much guaranteeing that way more players would end up accessing it, but instead it's just a tab in the main menu. There's no doubt that D Maschine is a very interesting addition to the world of COD Zombies with some genuinely awesome features, but also a lot of major negatives, so we've really got to ask the question, how good is this map? Treyarch's mission with D Maschine was clear for all to see very early on. Bring COD Zombies into the modern day by combining Warzone style mechanics with classic undead slaying gameplay. Its goal was to bring together new casual players with old school zombie diehards and offer them an experience that was able to meet both of their expectations. And to some extent I feel like it managed to do that, but in my eyes it definitely leant slightly too far toward the casual side. There is no doubt that in general Maschine was received very well by the community at the time of release, with it being very popular and pulling in large numbers of players. This was of course helped by the smart decision to have the classic setup of 4 elemental wonder weapons and what is definitely a more simple play space. Add on top of this what is a very impressive atmosphere and genuinely stunning visuals, and you have a very strong zombies experience that was pretty successful in launching the zombies content for Cold War. With that said though, looking back I can't help but feel it's really missing some key parts of what make a zombies map really top tier. A weak story, easy easter egg and extremely underwhelming boss fight really stopped Maschine from going down as one of the zombies greats in my eyes. It gets so much right and really did break boundaries for zombies going forward, essentially changing the mode into something massively different to that which we'd seen before. But even that is not able to totally make up for what I believe is a map that lacks content and swings too closely to a very casual experience. Is Maschine a bad map? No, absolutely not. I would even go as far as to say it's good. But I don't believe that it comes anywhere close to the best we've ever seen and can't even really hold the crown for best map in Cold War zombies. Absolutely zero atmosphere, the easiest boss fight of all time, the most hated Cold War zombies map. After the complete reboot of zombies, it had been aligned with a totally new Call of Duty audience, everything was looking positive, right? So what happened with Firebase Z? Many fans believe it really didn't live up to the hype, but was it honestly as bad as the community believed? Although Firebase Z definitely has its problems, I personally don't think that point of view applies to the map's wonder weapon, the K-84. Over the years, this badass looking piece of kit has developed a pretty negative collection of opinions from many in the zombies community, but I'm not one of them. I genuinely love this wonder weapon, I think it's fantastic. No, it probably doesn't come anywhere close to my favourite of all time and honestly isn't even the best in Cold War, however that doesn't mean I don't really enjoy using it. There's just something so satisfying about shredding through zombies with a laser rifle. I'm always a huge sucker for any new version of the ray gun, not only because of the lore of these hugely nostalgic weapons, but also because Treyarch always manages to do them so well. It even has a pretty awesome secondary fire type which harks back to a weapon we saw previously in the original Ether story. You essentially drop a ball of energy that you could then spray out in order to overload it, which completely obliterates zombies. Could the primary fire type of the K do with being a little bit more powerful? Absolutely, I won't disagree with the community on that one, but it being slightly underpowered is not enough for me to dislike the weapon. Fortunately for anyone who is a fan, there's also a whole host of ways to get hold of this thing in Firebase Z. Feeling a little bit lazy? Just save up some points and hit the mystery box in order to grab it. Looking for a challenge? Just activate the trial system, make it all the way to legendary, and you can access it as a reward for your hard work. But if you're a fan of classic zombie quests, Firebase Z has you covered too, as there's also a pretty cool side easter egg in order to guarantee that you'll get the K-84 if you're a fan of it like myself. And we've got to talk about how in the game's lore this wonder weapon is most likely based on early concepts of the ray gun Mark III from Gorod Krovi, but of course in this universe diverged away from that well-known weapon and instead uses Ethereum technology. Which is why of course the secondary fire of the K is very reminiscent of that much loved weapon. This is not a detail that needed to exist in Firebase Z in any way, shape or form, but I'm so glad the devs included it because it's an incredible callback to Black Ops 3 and helps tie the Dark Ether universe to the older story that everyone knows and loves. The K-84 can of course be incredibly useful for taking down the brand new enemy of the map, the Mimic. Okay, let's get one thing clear. Many years after Cold War Zombies, the Mimic would become pretty overused, appearing in a number of maps and even entirely different game modes. But with Firebase Z being its first ever appearance, I think we have to judge it differently here. Generally, I'm always pretty happy with a new mini-boss enemy in COD Zombies, with a few exceptions of course. It's always good to have something new and interesting to take on after many years of training the Horde, and so the Mimic's arrival in this map was definitely a good thing, even if it would become a bit annoying many years later. Visually, this thing looks great, appearing genuinely intimidating and looking pretty disgusting. And it can honestly pose a bit of a threat with the ability to pull players towards it, which can cause you some problems if you get caught in a horde of zombies. I personally would have liked it to be a bit harder to kill and have it show up less often, but that issue isn't enough to make me dislike its appearance in Firebase Z. They also actually have an extremely unique gameplay mechanic that had never been seen up to this point, essentially acting as a surprise enemy by disguising themselves as various things around the map. Although disliked by many, I actually think this feature is very interesting and a hugely unique way to cause zombie players some problems. There is unfortunately a well-known Easter egg step that heavily features these enemies in this mechanic that we'll get onto later though, that does undermine their inclusion in this map slightly, but I wouldn't say that affects the quality of the enemy overall. They're actually not the only controversial thing on this map, as you could definitely say the same about the very well-known defense rounds that you also get on Firebase Z. This is 100% another aspect of the map that a large portion of the zombies community hugely dislike, but again, I'm not one of them. I actually believe that this very unique mechanic brings something fresh and interesting to the game that can totally break up the normal flow of a zombies game, but in a good way. It very much reminds me of the Templar zombies on Origins who could wipe out generators, except this time around it feels like a genuine challenge and is very visually impressive. Don't get me wrong, this idea is far from perfect and definitely has some issues, with a failure dishing out some pretty rough consequences, even going as far as to block your access to certain features until you get the power back on. But I don't have anywhere near as much of a problem with this gameplay mechanic as many others do. I do however think it could be vastly improved, as the main problem with it is that it is 100% forced upon you regardless of whether you actually want to take on the challenge. This mechanic would have worked much better if players had the option to activate a defense objective themselves in order to take on a challenge and get some really useful rewards. With that said though, I do appreciate its inclusion in the map nonetheless, as fresh mechanics and attempts at new features are very often a good thing in my eyes. Something else that was heavily criticised by the community over the years, which I actually don't agree with, is the map layout. It was described as boring and basic by people, and although I wouldn't say it's anything other than fairly simple, I don't necessarily see that as a problem. Sometimes very simple layouts for zombies maps can be pretty boring, but for some reason I don't find this to be the case with Firebase Z. It's certainly not the most extravagant map layout I've ever seen and doesn't have anything on the more top tier experiences in COD Zombies history, but sometimes something a little bit more simple can be fun, and it honestly reminds me of Ascension in a very good way. Once you teleport in from the spawn area, which is actually something we'll get onto later, you then have the choice of 3 different paths to take in order to access various areas of the map. Each has their own ether reactor which needs to be activated and certain perks that you can get hold of. The separate sections may not be massively varied, but I do appreciate the more simple system in this map, as it makes traversing Firebase Z very easy and not massively time consuming. There are occasions in COD Zombies where I think a more basic and simple map design is a mistake, Maschine being one of those, as it feels like it's missing something, but in Firebase Z I just don't see it like that. Would the map being bigger than it is improve it? Possibly. But it's not something that I think was 100% needed, as the 3-section system here actually makes for a pretty satisfying experience in my opinion. Unfortunately, there are quite a few positives here, and we can luckily add in the story for Firebase Z too. Let's get one thing straight, the narrative of this map is not going to win any Oscars, nor is it going to reach the heights of certain other entries into the Zombies franchise, but it's a clear improvement on the complete lack of narrative on display with Maschine. The addition of certain on-map characters such as Peck and Ravenov really help to tell a much more cohesive story and actually allow you to feel like you're part of something bigger with more in-depth plot lines. To some degree, it still suffers from some of the same issues as Maschine due to the fact that you're merely playing as an operator, so you do often feel very much like an extra in someone else's movie, but overall it's definitely stronger than the Cold War Zombies launch map. The narrative is definitely helped by certain cutscenes present in the map that appear as part of the Easter egg that we'll get onto shortly, because they really do add to the overarching story of Cold War and actually make you feel like what you're doing is having genuine in-world consequences. As mentioned though, we can't kid ourselves and suggest that the story on display here is to the level of things like Ether or Chaos, but credit where it's due, as this is a huge improvement over the previous map and should be praised for that. However, it's no secret, as I've mentioned, that Firebase Z is a map that has been very controversial over the years in the eyes of zombie fans, and there are many valid reasons as to why they feel like that. After the Maschine Easter egg was considered pretty simple and not particularly challenging, then surely the devs would up the ante for Firebase Z, right? Yeah, not really. Unfortunately, just like Cold War's launch map, it's just not really difficult enough. The vast majority of steps are fairly simple and can be done on the first try without too much effort. The quest does have some cool parts, including the lockdown in one of the defense areas. This at least provides some level of challenge, even if it's not hugely difficult. But most of the main quest is never going to test the more highly skilled zombie players, and just like Maschine, seems to lean a little bit too closely to a much more casual Easter egg. Well, that is apart from one infamous step that is hated even numerous years after the map first landed, and I've got to say I agree with those opinions. The mimic step is absolutely infuriating, and sure, no doubt the average answer for this is skill issue, but if after many years of people playing this still causes them some problems, then maybe it was just poorly thought out. Having to capture mimics is not a difficult thing to do. It was in fact a very interesting idea that I actually liked. It's just the inconsistency of it that's kind of mind-blowing. It has to be a very specific mimic that spawns only in certain areas containing tons of fake loot on the ground. This may sound simple, but it's not. It's a nightmare. Mimics spawning in other places essentially cancel out the ability to get the right one for the Easter egg. They can spawn and then you lose track of which is the right one. You can be forever collecting this enemy in the trap over and over again, transporting it to the station on the map and repeatedly finding out it's useless because it gives you no indicator if it's even the right one to begin with. It's not the idea of the step that's bad, it's the implementation of it, as sadly it just feels like it was either very poorly thought out or designed specifically to annoy players. Outside of this, the main quest is very straightforward and honestly a bit too short. It sadly suffers from the same problem as Maschine, with the Easter egg just not being in depth enough for long-term zombie fans. But of course, if you were new to the scene at the time, I could understand how something a bit more simple would have been great for you. But if we're talking about things that are simple, then wow, we've got to cover that boss fight, because this could well be the easiest one in COD Zombies history. It doesn't really consist of anything more than just spraying the Order in the face as much as possible with your strongest weapon. Sure, you have to deal with zombies and boss enemies at the same time, but you have a decently sized area to do that in, so it's honestly just not too tough. Couple the complete lack of challenge with the fact that it just takes place in the spawn area, not even a unique boss arena, and you have a recipe for a pretty weak encounter. Oh, did I mention you can actually end up fighting this very same boss during one of the defense rounds, which understandably just makes the final fight even more underwhelming due to this not even being the first time you've encountered this beast. There's unfortunately just nothing special about this final boss whatsoever. If players had never seen it before, fought the Order in a completely new special looking arena, and had to take on a well thought out encounter with unique attacks and crazy phases of various levels of danger, then sure, it could have been great. But at that point, that's just a completely different boss fight that I've created in my own head. Sure, this boss fight is better than none at all, and I have to say I honestly think I'd rather take on the Order than get involved in what we can't even really call a boss fight from the end of Maschine. But with that said, I can't sit here and suggest that this final encounter is anything other than very disappointing. As I mentioned, it weirdly takes place in the spawn area, and whilst we're talking about that area, we need to get a little bit more in depth with it. Upon launching into the map, this place is actually really impressive. Visually it looks great and it has a lot of very useful things. An armor machine, the Wonder Fizz, Pack-a-Punch and a quick revive machine. The only problem is you can't access half of it until you've turned the power on. And you realise quickly that this is merely a starting area and you actually need to teleport into the real Firebase. At first glance, this is really cool and an interesting way to start the match, kind of reminding me of Moon. It's only later though, as you progress to higher rounds, that you realise how annoying this setup is. Once the power's on and you can finally Pack-a-Punch, you need to return to the starting area. Then you get more points and you want to Pack-a-Punch again, you need to return to the starting area. You want to start the Easter egg by talking to Ravenov, you need to return to the starting area. You want to use the Wonder Fizz machine, you need to return to the starting area. And then many times throughout the main quest, you need to return to... You see where I'm going with this, right? I could do it all day. Having to constantly teleport back into spawn to do these things gets old fast. Now, it's not some major issue that automatically makes the map terrible, it's just annoying and gets pretty frustrating. You could probably class this as more of a nitpick than a serious problem, but either way, I feel like this system could have been planned out far better. When you think about it though, there's a very simple reason as to why this is the case. The spawn area has a lot of these important things, for example the Wonder Fizz machine, because this is where the boss fight takes place, so if you go down you can buy whatever perks you want again. So realistically, if Firebase Z just had a unique place to actually take on the Order final encounter, then you wouldn't need to have machines like this in the spawn area. I genuinely love when the devs try new things in zombies, so I'm pretty much always down for a bit of experimentation, but I also think you've got to call it out when it just doesn't work, and this is one of those situations. Unfortunately, it's not the only thing that doesn't really land properly in Firebase Z, as you could definitely say the same for the atmosphere. Well, actually, what atmosphere? It might seem a bit harsh to say, but it's pretty much non-existent. Earlier I compared this map to Ascension in terms of the map layout, but sadly that doesn't extend to the atmosphere because it just doesn't really exist on Firebase Z. Visually, I don't think the experience looks bad at all, and I very much enjoy the old dirty rundown military base theme, but what it really needs is that extra level of creepiness to really hammer the theme home. That is exactly what Ascension got right with its tone and vibe, which is helped by the fact that the map does not take place in bright sunlight like Firebase Z, which is probably something that holds it back slightly in the atmosphere department. A daytime zombies map is not automatically a recipe for a bad setting, it often just makes it much more difficult for it to feel like a true classic zombies experience in terms of atmosphere, and also sometimes makes it hard for fans to feel like they're playing a truly unnerving experience. And this, along with a number of things I've already mentioned, just makes it very tough for Firebase Z to stand out in an ever-growing list of COD Zombies maps. But it leaves us with one big question: is it really as bad as the zombies community believes? Over the many years since the release of Cold War Zombies, the community has been extremely vocal about Firebase Z, and the general consensus is pretty clear: it is not well liked at all. Even a lot of the things I've discussed as positive features are considered large negatives by many people, leading to a very disliked map overall. I have to say though, in general, I don't agree with the zombies community's overall consensus on Firebase Z. Yes, it has its problems, yes, it has some rather odd design choices, and yes, there are certainly things I would change about it, but I don't think it deserves anywhere near as much hate as it gets, and shockingly, I'd probably choose to play this experience over Maschine. It can in many ways be quite a frustrating map, but not because of what it offers players, more so because of what could have been. I think with some slight changes to the experience, we could well have been looking at a map that would be considered one of the greats. I always find myself enjoying Firebase Z whenever I jump into it, but it definitely leaves me wondering how the community would have felt if Treyarch had gone in a slightly different direction with it. But I think it's important to note and once again reiterate that this map to me is much stronger than fans think, and I respect the experimentation the devs went for with Firebase Z. If only all of those design choices had worked out just a little bit better. The most controversial DLC of all time, a break from classic round-based gameplay, the mode that changed COD Zombies forever. For the first time ever, COD Zombies fans would be dropping into an open world style mode to take on the undead. It was unlike anything the community had seen before and would end up shaping future entries in the franchise. But with such a huge change to the gameplay fans had loved for over a decade, the real question is just how good was Outbreak? With worlds as vast as those found in Outbreak, there is no way that they could be solely populated by zombies. It would have gotten boring pretty fast, but luckily that's not the case here. Although there are definitely issues with the worlds available in Outbreak that I'll get onto, I wouldn't say the enemy variety is one of them. The mode incorporated special enemies that were actually unique to Outbreak upon its release, although they would end up appearing in other DLCs later. The Krasny Soldat first showed up in Outbreak to cause players some serious problems, and sure, it may essentially be pretty similar to the Panzer seen in more classic Treyarch experiences, but to see something like this arrive in Cold War was a welcome addition. Not only that, but a new enemy that had never been seen before also made its debut in Outbreak, the Tempest. An otherworldly, horrific combination of blues and purples known for its bolts of electricity. They show up pretty often in this open world style mode, causing players some serious problems by decimating their health and shutting down vehicles. With their ability to teleport fairly rapidly, they create an interesting new level to the Outbreak gameplay by not allowing players to take them out instantly, meaning fans always need to keep track of them whilst they're also dealing with the standard undead. There are also all sorts of other foes to deal with, some showing up when the mode launched, others being added later throughout the DLC season after they'd appeared in other experiences first. Manglers, megatons, mimics and abominations, they all attempt to take fans down in Outbreak, and this to me is one of the best things about the mode, its wide variety of enemies. Although certain aspects of this experience can definitely become monotonous, I wouldn't say that's the case for the creatures you're fighting against. Things even ramp up to a whole nother level if you decide to take on a battle that makes simple special enemies look like a walk in the park. At various points throughout your journey in the Outbreak world, you'll have the chance to undertake some serious fights with the Order that of course originally showed up in Firebase Z. Things are a bit different this time though, with fans needing to get up close and personal with this Dark Ether creature in order to take it down. The wide variety of attacks based upon your proximity to the Order makes the battle tense and exciting. This thing even has one of the wildest attacks in COD Zombies history, a literal hellhound cannon. It launches these undead dogs through the air with the hope of blowing you straight off the map. Although the Order's no pushover, this fight is not impossible and feels like a very fair level of challenge connected closely with whatever world number you're currently on. And of course, if you're successful, it can dish out some very useful loot that serves players well if they plan on getting as far as they possibly can in Outbreak. Or maybe even taking things further and striving to take on the hardest battle in the entire mode. We'll get onto the major portion of Outbreak's Easter eggs very shortly, but for now we need to talk about its final conclusion, the Legion. This final boss fight is definitely up there with the best that Cold War has to offer due to its difficulty and intensity. Sure, it may technically just be a giant version of the Tempest, but because of its grand and challenging nature, it ends up feeling like so much more than that. Players are constantly being swarmed by hordes of the undead as well as various mini-bosses, meaning that fans never get a minute's relaxation, and when you combine this with the fact that the Legion was the first ever final encounter to give players a time limit, they were in for a very tricky time. There is a reason that this battle is considered massively challenging by many members of the community, and understandably so. Attempting to pummel the Legion with enough damage to reveal its electrical orbs, which then additionally need to be destroyed, is no easy task. All while avoiding other enemies and attacks from the Legion itself, it's honestly pretty crazy. And for a mode which often leans in the direction of being on the easier side, you definitely cannot say the same for this boss battle, and that in my eyes is a very good thing. But understandably, with a DLC as controversial as Outbreak, it came with various negatives that really stopped it reaching its full potential and truly becoming a mode that would be loved by the community. Luckily, as I've mentioned, Outbreak's first main quest culminates in a truly brilliant final battle. It's just a shame that the rest of the Easter egg feels totally lackluster. It's sadly almost as if a large portion of this main quest really doesn't work in the world of Outbreak. In my eyes, Easter egg steps are supposed to be challenging and keep you on the edge as you attempt to complete tasks while having to constantly deal with the zombies. And that's the reason this doesn't really work in Outbreak, because the vast majority of the time you're not being pressured by the undead at all. Sure, some steps will cause players to be swarmed by the horde, which keeps things interesting, but it only lasts so long before fans are back to the simple downtime between tasks, and truthfully it just makes things far too easy. The only time where this main quest feels like classic zombies in an awesome and challenging way is after you enter the underground bunker in Ruka and need to acquire 3 different launch keys. It then feels like the good old days of round-based Easter eggs where you're constantly on your toes needing to get things done quickly and safely whilst avoiding zombies. And I just gotta say, that mimic step, wow, it's insane. Getting swamped by that many boss enemies in one go is genuinely crazy, and it's easily one of the best aspects of this quest. But unfortunately, this is the only time throughout this Easter egg outside of the boss fight where it feels like you're doing something worthwhile and challenging. All of the build up to this part has got to be up there with some of the most dull tasks in main quest history, and to be honest, that really comes down to the fact that in my eyes this part of what we love in zombies just doesn't cross over well to Outbreak at all. And interestingly, it's actually not the only main Easter egg in Outbreak. There's also a second quest, and sure, you're probably thinking, oh, so obviously this is going to be way better than the first Easter egg, right? No it isn't. If anything, it's worse. It's tragically just made up of a number of rather dull steps that don't really provide any level of challenge to players, with the only interesting parts being the final escort from the bridge and the Xfill battle against a huge number of enemies. The Order is a cool addition here, and as I mentioned previously, I think them being added into Outbreak is a good thing. But realistically, you will already have fought a number of them before this point, which just makes this supposed boss battle feel pretty underwhelming. And that's the major issue with both main quests in this mode. Outside of the Legion boss fight, they're just far too easy. And due to the open world environment, they honestly needed the difficulty turning up by a few notches to combat the extra space given to players in Outbreak. The quality of this mode also probably isn't helped by the fact that unfortunately all of the worlds featured in this open world style DLC are not unique to zombies at all. They're largely just reused content from the Fireteam multiplayer mode, and don't get me wrong, expecting that many huge maps to be fully original to zombies is a little bit ridiculous, but I honestly feel like they could have been reworked or meshed with certain aspects of the Dark Ether in order to make them feel less bland and more exciting. Sure, during certain main objectives and quest steps, technically you are transported to the Dark Ether, which is cool, but it's essentially identical to the map you're already on, but with a few jellyfish roaming about, and doesn't look anywhere near as impressive as what players got to see in Maschine. It's not even that these worlds are bad, it's just that they don't have that awesome zombies atmosphere to them. It genuinely just feels like you're slaying the undead in multiplayer experiences because you kind of are. Although none are particularly mind-blowing, some are more interesting than others, with Alpine and Zoo being personal favourites of mine. Sadly though, there is certainly one map that stands out as unfortunately really bad. In my opinion, Sanatorium is nearly unbearable to play on, not because of the design of the map itself, but because of the darkness, which just makes everything completely uninteresting. I can see why the devs may want to go for a dark aesthetic to set the mood in this world, but it could have been done so much better than this, because sadly it doesn't create any kind of creepy or unnerving atmosphere at all. It just looks like the devs dropped the brightness slider all the way down to the bottom, and it just comes across as lazy. And unfortunately, so does the lack of main objectives in Outbreak. I just don't think there is anywhere near enough of these to make the mode massively replayable. It really feels like you're constantly doing the same thing every single time you jump into a game of Outbreak, and for a mode that makes it clear that the main objectives are one of the most important things in each world, that's not really good enough. Having just over a handful of main objectives in this supposedly open world style mode is just nowhere near the level it needs to be. For Outbreak to come across like the fully expanded mode it claims to be, it honestly needed a lot more than this to feel like you're truly experiencing something next level. You just constantly find yourself repeating the same tasks over and over again with no variation to them. If you've escorted the rover 20 times before, which is very likely, then it just ends up feeling so monotonous. Outbreak really needed more to make players want to constantly come back to it, and it just doesn't have that. The side objectives in each world help to provide some variety and additional things to do, which makes the maps feel slightly more fleshed out, but it's not enough to massively improve things. I would honestly say, to be truly impressive, Outbreak needed at least twice as many different main objectives than it ended up with, if not more. That would then have the chance to make fans feel like they were playing in a constantly varying world that was ever changing due to the dangers of the undead, and that's really not what we got. And unsurprisingly, it wasn't the only thing that was lacking in DLC 2. Outbreak is of course made up of various things from other zombies experiences, as I've mentioned, and this also extends to wonder weapons. The mode contains a number of different wonder weapons from across the Cold War season that fans came to know and love, which obviously is brilliant. For this kind of experience, I would essentially say the more wonder weapons the better. Extra interesting ways to take down zombies is always a good thing, and that definitely applies to exciting weapons to get out of the mystery box or from certain trials. But my issue here is more related to the fact that this is the only main DLC experience throughout the whole of Cold War with no new wonder weapon. Out of all of the things not to bring over from round-based zombies, a fresh wonder weapon is perhaps one of the most unforgivable. As I mentioned, yes, having a whole host of other wonder weapons is good, but let's be real, we'd probably give that up in a heartbeat to get hold of something completely new and mind-blowing. And so the lack of this is just another thing that comes across as a lack of effort when building out this mode. It unfortunately makes Outbreak feel like a large filler piece of content designed to tide players over until the next round-based experience was ready. There's no doubt that Outbreak was a huge gamble for the devs at Treyarch. It was unlike anything we'd ever seen before and was a controversial arrival in Cold War Zombies. But ultimately, was it really as bad as many fans made out? The first ever attempt to open world zombies was received by the community with very mixed opinions. Some fans loved the attempt by the devs to try something fresh and make a break from classic round-based gameplay. Others, however, not so much. Many really saw it as an attempt by Treyarch to plug a content gap with reused assets instead of giving players what they actually wanted. There's no doubt that Outbreak definitely came with both positives and negatives, which makes the question of whether or not it's actually good a tough one. The simplest way to answer that is by saying it tried. It tried to do a lot. But unfortunately, trying isn't the same as achieving. Realistically, I don't think the mode did enough to be classed as truly good, but it certainly isn't awful either. It was essentially the first stage in a journey toward a fully open world mode that would of course be expanded massively in Modern Warfare Zombies. But with that said and with that knowledge in mind, it very much makes Outbreak feel like a testing demo for that experience. And for that very reason, it annoyingly stands out in Cold War as the weakest content the game has to offer, and leaves me feeling like maybe the devs should have stuck with a classic round-based map for DLC 2 and released Outbreak as additional content later down the line. The return of truly top tier content, the creation of a fan favourite character, the saviour of Cold War zombies. It's no secret that up until the arrival of Toten, the world of Cold War zombies had been very polarising with fans. Lacklustre Easter eggs, simple boss fights and controversial new open world modes had pushed away many long-term players, while newcomers often appreciated its combination of undead slaying and more modern gameplay mechanics. But one thing that the vast majority of the community could agree on was that Toten was a true return to form for Treyarch, leaving us with one question: what exactly made this map so good? Coming off the back of two experiences that in the eyes of many really missed the mark in terms of atmosphere and visuals, it was time for Treyarch to go back to the drawing board and give fans one of the most truly creepy and unnerving zombies experiences for years, and that is exactly what they managed to do with the incredible Toten. It's immediately obvious upon loading into the map that the devs got everything right when it comes to atmosphere, because the nostalgia hits you like a truck. The classic old school round jingle, and just like that you know you're about to jump into something special. Even from the rooftops of this war-torn Berlin building, the incredible visuals are already clear to see, giving you slight hints in the distance of the horrors you're about to witness as you uncover Toten's secrets. The incredible vibe and feel of the map only deepens as you explore the streets and cast your eyes over the destruction of the area and get an even closer look at what appears to be a demonic ritual lying just out of reach. In order to fully understand what lies just beyond the wall, players have to enter the subway, and this is where the dark and unsettling nature of this experience is taken to the next level. Shadowed tunnels and murky sewers serve to lead players on their way back to the surface, but I think the most intimidating sight could well be something much more unexpected. The flaming train that hurtles past, filled with the cries of the damned, is phenomenal. It's not often we get anything as incredible as this when it comes to visuals in COD Zombies. All of this is capped off in a pretty breathtaking way as you emerge from underground into the Pack-a-Punch area and finally uncover the horrors of what could be seen from spawn. This is the first glimpse of a truly creepy enemy, the Disciple, who we'll talk about a bit more in depth shortly. And this encounter really feels like the final piece in the Toten puzzle that showcases to players exactly what they're part of and truly feels like something amazing. There is no doubt Treyarch 100% hit the mark with the map's atmosphere. It's not very often they manage to create a vibe this incredible, but they should absolutely be applauded here, as not many experiences can compete with what's on show in Toten. The devs absolutely need to get the creepy, eerie nature of the experience right, and this map is a great example of how you hit the nail on the head. It doesn't end there though, because the layout of Toten helps to complement the mood on display absolutely perfectly. It can often be extremely tough for a team of developers to find the right balance of play spaces in a zombies experience, but this map smashes it out of the park. It offers fans a variety of different areas depending on their play style: wide open areas for training, more cramped hallways for close quarters, and straight up campable rooms that can get pretty crazy very quickly. And luckily, all of these different sections are linked very well. There is the chance that Toten can feel overwhelming at first and even slightly complicated, but once learned, it's clear that the map is fantastic, often forcing players to transition through various different types of play space when wanting to accomplish different things, which of course completely changes how you need to play. Now obviously all of this is very important, but it's nothing without a smart and easily understandable way to traverse the map, and luckily this has that in abundance with its zipline system. Without these fantastic transport routes, Mauer would no doubt be a bit of a chore to navigate, particularly getting from one rooftop to another, but luckily all of this is solved for us. Essentially, all major important areas are connected together via the system, meaning that no matter where you're looking to play or what style of game you're going for, if you need to switch things up quickly, you can do that with absolutely no hassle. I do however have one slight reservation when it comes to the verticality of the experience, and that is the ascending ziplines. Don't get me wrong, this could well just be a me problem, but these things seem so delayed when jumping on them. I've even taken hits due to the extremely slow animation. It doesn't really seem to be an issue with the horizontal version, but my god, it feels like this version takes forever. But even with that said though, the overall system is fantastic and the perfect way to link various sections of the map in order to create an easily accessible experience for fans. Even with these incredibly huge positives, I think we can all agree that it could come crashing down if the map's wonder weapon is really not up to par, but luckily that definitely isn't the case here. The zombies community was in good hands with the amazing SuperAce, the conversion ready binary repeater standard. Sure, not the best name when read out like that, maybe we'll just stick with SuperAce. This thing is a 100% badass piece of kit and can luckily be collected from a very simple side quest, guaranteeing you'll get your hands on it without having to spend a fortune on the unforgiving mystery box. Strangely, the base level SuperAce is realistically the best, with it acting like a laser pistol accompanied by a secondary fire coming from the glowing orb. This version absolutely shreds through zombies, and although it may not be the most OP wonder weapon of all time, it's definitely up there and has to be the primary way for destroying the undead in Toten. It is of course not the only version of this crazy weapon available to fans, with 3 others up for grabs through various mods. I'll discuss the exact method for this a little bit later on, but for now let's touch on the Swarm variant, as this is definitely one of the stronger ones available. Literally locking onto enemies and wiping them out in an instant. Outside of the base variant of this weapon, this is realistically the one that most people will go for because it's so powerful. Tragically, the other 2 mods aren't on the level of this banger, with the burst and laser rifle versions not being anywhere near as useful. With that said though, they do at least look incredible and provide a very different way to take on the Horde. It's just unfortunate that they aren't slightly more powerful. Interestingly though, the laser mode may be weak, but it's pretty important when it comes to the map's Easter egg. It's no secret that in the world of Cold War zombies prior to the arrival of Toten, the community was dealing with some pretty weak and unchallenging Easter eggs. Fortunately, this incredible map was here to change that. With this experience, Cold War finally had a main quest worthy of the historic legacy of zombies. Okay, perhaps a bit of an exaggeration, I'm not sure we can put this on the level of the Black Ops 3 greats, but there is no doubt that compared to the rest of the main quest content available in this game, it was a huge step up. The Easter egg is full to the brim with genuinely interesting steps, from upgrading Klaus to stopping the train and transporting uranium. It's not necessarily outrageously challenging, but it's clearly more difficult than both Maschine and Firebase Z, which is a huge positive, as myself and many others still believe that they genuinely missed the mark. I've also got to touch on the use of the Cerberus laser mode to reveal the secret lab. That is such a cool addition to the map that realistically didn't necessarily need to happen, as we saw with previous Cold War Easter eggs not really allowing players access to any additional areas. But I'm so glad they included this, as it looks phenomenal and was of course also very important when it comes to the map's final boss encounter. A huge round of applause for Treyarch. This is how you make a return to form with a COD Zombies boss fight. Run it back just a couple of maps and things were not looking good, with Machine's final phase not even really being a proper boss, along with the fact that it was nearly impossible to fail. Couple that with the Order from Firebase Z being a simple spray and pray exercise, and understandably the zombies community wasn't holding out much hope for what they'd receive in Toten. There is absolutely no way I could be disappointed with the Valentina boss fight though. It's exactly the kind of thing I look for when taking on a COD Zombies experience. Appropriately challenging, learnable steps and attacks that reward you for patience and knowledge, and various stages ramping up the difficulty before an awesome final climax. Although it's not an entirely new boss fight area, I'll let the devs off here due to it starting and ending in the secret lab, which is not part of the normal play space unless you're doing the Easter egg. The movement around various areas of the map is also a cool addition too, making the encounter feel fresh at various points and also helping to keep the pace up. And this impressive final boss reaches its crescendo with an amazing sacrifice from Klaus that is done in the exact perfect way you would expect from this character. Although that may be the final appearance of this famous guy, we need to talk about him more in depth. If you told COD Zombies fans prior to the release of Toten that they were going to be getting another hireable NPC style bot, I can't imagine they'd have been particularly excited to hear about it. However, if they'd have known it would be as good as Klaus, then I'm pretty confident that they would be feeling massively different. Never before or since has an in-game protection robot had this level of personality and been so heavily involved in the story of the map. Before, they'd always just felt like small gameplay additions that often acted as a mini side quest and honestly weren't even really that useful. Now, I'm definitely not saying that Klaus is some ridiculously overpowered sidekick who's going to take you to high rounds, because that's absolutely not the case, but that's not really the point here. This character is so much more than that due to his attitude and personality. He provides some much needed comic relief in what is clearly a very dark and grim experience. But these aren't just some terrible jokes out of nowhere, this guy is genuinely funny.
You need to keep me safe, even if it means your own death.
Does anyone else feel a drop? I am not sure.
I have no skin. I feel depressed. None of you know how that feels. Did you have dolls as a child? Maybe you should have. I usually follow orders, but that one seems stupid.
Add on to this the fact that he's not just some basic dude, he can even be upgraded to make him stronger and accessible more quickly. And don't forget that he just ends up looking even more badass, which is always a positive. As mentioned too, this guy is pivotal in Toten's Easter egg, which is not something that COD Zombies fans see very often. And it seems fair to say that over the years he's left a huge lasting impression on many players, including myself. With this absolute legend being pretty useful, he can even help you take down the new enemy of the map, the Disciple. Although they would of course be added to Outbreak later down the line, this was their initial appearance. We touched earlier on the fact that your first glimpse of them can be found upon the arrival at the Pack-a-Punch machine, but following this you will be seeing these guys a lot. Now normally I may consider this a bad thing when there is a complete overabundance of a special enemy, but you know what, it kind of works here. Luckily they are essentially the opposite of bullet sponges and so don't last too long. Whilst they are around though, Disciples do actually offer some very cool and unique mechanics, buffing enemies from a distance in an attempt to cause you some problems. The only time they really directly affect the player is when you get too close and they will slowly begin to drain your life away. But their main goal is more of a zombie support role and it does actually work really well. They don't feel like a chore to dispatch, but also feel like a threat that really does need to be eliminated or you'll be forever fighting buffed enemies. Thematically they definitely fit well in Toten 2 and serve to improve the already amazing atmosphere and vibe. Many COD Zombies fans including myself are in agreement that this map is right up there with the greats. But as incredible as it is, it doesn't mean it's perfect, and although the list of downsides may not come close to its positives, it's still there waiting to be talked about. I have made it pretty clear where my opinions lie in terms of the map's visuals. They're amazing, it's that simple, but they're certainly not perfect. On the surface everything looks great until you look a little bit closer. Certain other Zombies YouTubers have pointed out over the years that the background assets of Toten are really not up to par, and I have to say sadly I think they're totally right. Although they don't spoil the experience, if you do actually take a closer look at them they're genuinely quite poor and do not meet the high standards of this great map. It really is a shame that more time and effort wasn't spent on this aspect of the experience because it does hold it back somewhat and can take away from the realism of Toten if you take the time to cast your eyes beyond the obvious borders of the play space. Although that issue could well boil down to a lack of time, other negatives are a little bit more frustrating. I've already made my opinions known that the 4 Cerberus Wonder Weapon variants available in Toten are brilliant. However, I've got to say the process to obtain them is not. Collectible Wonder Weapon mods dropped by zombies upon elimination is certainly a unique mechanic, so I won't hold that against the devs, but its implementation leaves a lot to be desired in my opinion. I would have personally preferred mini quests to unlock all 4 of these variants and then have the option to choose your favourite. Sure, the droppable mods are easier to get hold of, but that whole idea falls down on the fact that once the ammo runs out for your current one, it literally just disappears and you go back to the base Cerberus. So if you have a favourite or one you particularly want to use, you could be waiting to get hold of it or constantly losing it and have to recollect it, which in my opinion can be really annoying. It's a genuinely strange design choice in my eyes to repeatedly give you various versions of a wonder weapon and then take it away from the player. And things don't get any better if you stick the Cerberus in the Pack-a-Punch machine either, because this camo is just really not good. Yeah, don't get me wrong, it's not the biggest issue in the history of Zombies maps, but a solid PAP camo is something fans remember for years after the release of new content. And although yes, that technically is true here, it's not for a good reason. It's just really bland and feels like it needs the vibrancy turned up. It's kind of wild to say that papping the wonder weapon somehow makes it look worse, and that should honestly never be the case. It's also not the only problem with the map, as I think we need to touch on the fact that in the more modern COD Zombies era, we really shouldn't be getting an experience with a complete lack of side content. This is unfortunately one of the biggest negatives about Toten and could well be the main thing holding it back from being a 10 out of 10 Zombies experience. Sure, you've got the Klaus upgrades, but that really feels like more of a major gameplay aspect than side content, to be honest. But I will say that the Disco Lockdown Easter egg is very cool and can secure players some genuinely good loot. However, outside of that, there just isn't really much to offer fans, and when you compare the minimal number of side quests to much more fleshed out zombies maps such as Terminus, the difference in quality is pretty drastic. But the most important question is, are these negatives really enough to stop Toten from being one of the greatest zombies experiences of all time, or at least the best map in Cold War? From the first minute of Toten, the quality is on display for all to see. Although featuring the vast majority of the more modern COD Zombies mechanics, it was clear for all to see that this was a map that really felt like a throwback to a time when Zombies was truly an unnerving and creepy experience. It possesses one of the most impressive atmospheres in a very long time, in combination with truly stunning visuals and a phenomenal map layout. The Easter egg and boss fight are definitely the strongest in Cold War, and the wonder weapon variants, although frustrating in some aspects, are hugely useful and look incredible. And let's not forget about one of the most important things on the entire map, everyone's favourite sarcastic AI companion. He could well be the best thing in the whole of Toten. Yes, there are certain drawbacks and minor negatives that I've covered, but they don't even come close to turning this experience into anything less than one of the strongest maps in modern times. It certainly wins the title of Best Cold War Zombies map, and although perhaps doesn't quite reach the dizzying heights of the greatest of all time, I think a lot of us can agree that if every COD Zombies map was as good as this, we'd all be pretty happy with the level of content Treyarch was dishing out to us. The worst map design of all time, a completely underwhelming boss fight, a totally lackluster conclusion to Cold War Zombies. After Toten managed to breathe new life into Cold War Zombies, hype in the community was at an all-time high as the game reached its climax with Forsaken. What was it going to offer players? Incredible wonder weapons, great nostalgic callbacks and strong story reveals? Sure, many fans would agree that that is exactly what they got. But tragically, it came intertwined with some of the strangest decisions of all time. And so very quickly it became immediately obvious to fans as they arrived at one important question: what the hell happened here? Although there are unfortunately many serious problems with Forsaken, luckily that statement 100% does not apply to the map's wonder weapon, the Chrysalax, because it could well be one of the best of all time. It's a genuine shame that this incredible piece of weaponry can only be found in an experience with so many issues. But let's not get too negative, this is the good section after all. The Chrysalax is essentially two weapons in one, starting off as a melee axe made purely from Ethereum crystals known as the Savager, but it can also be rearranged into a rapid-firing SMG style weapon called the Storm that rips through the undead. And both are incredibly useful in very different situations. Although it may initially seem like the Savager is totally broken and way too overpowered, only requiring you to constantly swing it in order to clean out the zombies, this is actually not totally true. Sure, I'm not going to sit here and say that this axe is anything other than extremely powerful. However, it does actually require a little bit of skill and knowledge, with players needing to learn the timing patterns of the swing in order to make sure they land in order to stop them being overwhelmed by the horde. Don't get me wrong, it's something that's extremely unlikely to happen, but if that is something players do end up struggling with, they have the option to switch to the Storm SMG, which operates much more like a standard weapon with far less risk. But it's important to note that although that thing is still incredibly powerful, it's not on the level of the Savager, which makes total sense because that is the version of this wonder weapon that can cause players far more problems if they don't remain focused. Like many wonder weapons in the more modern era of COD Zombies, there are a number of different ways to get hold of the Chrysalax, with the most consistent of course being a mini quest. Now let's get one thing straight, there are certain steps of this challenge which are genuinely cool, namely having to kill tons of enemies around this crystal in order to get hold of it, and also needing to get melee eliminations as the final stage to reveal this glorious weapon. And yes, I know this is the good section, but I've got to mention how annoying that abomination part is. Needing one of these huge beasts to fire their electricity bolt at you in order to break open a crystal and give you what you need can be so frustrating and time consuming, and to be honest, I'm just not here for it. On certain occasions you're dealing with pure RNG waiting for an abomination to spawn, and that kind of thing can become so tedious. But with that said, the annoyance of that step is nowhere near enough to make the Chrysalax anything other than one of the coolest wonder weapons of all time. And it's an absolute must on Forsaken, as nothing else even comes close to the Savager's ability to wipe out zombies. In my eyes, it's got to be the most impressive thing about this whole experience by an absolute mile. But interestingly, one of the first things you see in the entire experience of Forsaken is also a huge positive. It's not very often that a spawn area stands out as something truly incredible about a COD Zombies map, but this is 100% the case here. This is easily the best one in the whole of Cold War, and to be honest, it's probably got 90% of other Zombies experiences beat too. This thing is hectic, as it doesn't work like a normal zombie spawn room at all, and very much feels like a huge throwback to Moon. Rounds progress at breakneck speed and the zombies just keep coming. It's a pretty wild way to introduce players to Forsaken, and it works perfectly. Because essentially, you have to make the choice on how long this madness lasts. Find it a bit overwhelming, then no need to stick around, you can teleport pretty much immediately into the main part of the map. Or if you're feeling a little bit adventurous, stay strong and slay the undead. If you stick it out for long enough, you could end up with enough points to open up the entire map and get yourself set up for the game ahead. It is extremely rare to see something as cool as this as soon as you drop into a zombies experience, and for the obvious reasons it can't be done all the time or it would just become boring. But to see this kind of feature back was amazing and really felt like a brilliant dose of nostalgia for those who remember the chaos of spawning in at Groom Lake and having to survive the madness. The amazing callbacks don't stop there though, because one of the most obvious has got to be the addition of Burger Town. I don't think many people would disagree with the fact that one of the most controversial and hated modes in the franchise has got to be exo-zombies from Advanced Warfare. It was despised for a wide variety of reasons, but none more so than the infection map often called Burger Town. Well, amazingly, it's back in Forsaken for some reason. It even comes with a famous mascot Bubby, but don't worry, even though Forsaken may have some serious problems, this is just a funny throwback reference. You're not going to find yourself escorting any survivors around this map, thank God. It's also not the only nostalgic reference in the map though, as you can find others with the amazing arcade token system. This is such a cool addition and provides some genuinely brilliant side content. Simply get hold of a token through various methods, including a drop from zombies or perhaps even shelling out 10,000 points. And you can then interact with different arcade machines to play certain games, from obstacle courses with RC cars to some way more impressive references. They include being transported to a Dreisendracht themed area where you have to wipe out zombies in order to unlock a loot chest. But even better than that is when players get sent to actual NOCK and Toten to take on the Horde to grab themselves some upgrades. Sure, we may have seen a rebooted version of NOCK in D Maschine, but this feels like more of a throwback to the classic original from World at War. Outside of the Chrysalax, this really feels like one of the most unique things that Forsaken offers players, and I honestly believe it's a truly top level feature. Sadly though, top level features really aren't something you'll find in abundance in Forsaken, because it really does miss the mark in a number of respects, leading to what many fans see as one of the most frustrating zombies experiences in the modern era. Strap in, because things are about to get rough. For a COD Zombies map to reach the dizzying heights of greatest of all time, it essentially needs to have the full package, which often consists of various things from a great wonder weapon to some unique side content, and yes, Forsaken does have those things, but unfortunately it's lacking in nearly every other department, with one of the most important being the map's layout. The community has dealt with a wide variety over the years, ranging through various levels of love and hate, but I have to say I don't think any have ever done it as poorly as Forsaken. Things start so strongly with that incredibly chaotic spawn before teleporting into the main portion of the map, but it's honestly that early on where things start to fall apart. From this point onwards, players are subjected to what could well be one of the most dull and boring layouts of all time. Forsaken just essentially feels like one long line of streets from the start to the observation tower where players can find the Pack-a-Punch. It's something very rarely seen in COD Zombies, and for good reason, because it just doesn't work. To put it simply, it's not fun. It's a huge chore to have to trek through this map, but annoyingly the decision about how you make your way around this experience even feels like it's not really in your hands. And that is because this isn't even a play space you can traverse by just running to wherever you want. Forsaken is broken up into a number of sections using teleporters, which some may see as a useful time saver. However, to me it doesn't really feel like that at all. It comes across as more of a lazy feature to link the areas together with minimal effort, or perhaps even a last minute choice due to constraints put on the development team as Cold War came to a close. You can get access to zip lines, which do make getting back to the observation tower a little bit easier, but that doesn't really change the fact that it honestly doesn't feel like a very cohesive play space at all. I don't necessarily think that without the teleporters, Forsaken would suddenly turn into something much better than it currently is, because at the end of the day, that wouldn't fix what is just a fundamentally poorly planned out system. However, their inclusion in the experience just sadly serves to add even more negativity towards what is already a very weak play space. And this isn't helped by what many fans, including myself, see as a really poor atmosphere and vibe in Forsaken. Just like many other parts of this experience, everything starts incredibly well in that spawn area with this dark, grim and yet somehow visually stunning section kicking things off in a great way, leaving many of us with the question, what the hell happened with the rest of the map? Now, to be clear, the idea of a retro American style town enclosed in a military base is in no way a bad idea for a zombies experience. In fact, to me, it's the exact opposite. It had the potential to be phenomenal and incredibly unique, but that level of quality can only really be reached when the atmosphere aligns perfectly with everything else, and that definitely doesn't happen in Forsaken, because there just isn't an atmosphere at all. The juxtaposition between the spawn area and the rest of the map is pretty eye-opening. It's like they're taken from two entirely different experiences. It makes no sense. The lack of atmosphere in Forsaken probably stands out even more obviously because we had just arrived here from the absolutely incredible Toten, which mood and vibe wise was easily the best in Cold War and honestly could be one of the best ever. The drop in quality from one map to the next just sadly makes things feel even worse here, which is a genuine shame because if done well this map theme could have been great, but as it stands it just doesn't really match up to a lot of higher quality experiences. It never really feels like you're taking on anything intimidating or creepy whatsoever with Forsaken. That could possibly be because a lot of the content here is ripped straight from the campaign. And yeah, sure, that is often the case with a lot of experiences and the content used within them, but here it just feels so much more obvious because it doesn't mesh well with the vibe of zombies whatsoever. So unfortunately just ends up leaving us with a map that feels out of place and as if it's just genuinely been transplanted from another mode into the world of zombies. Sadly, things don't really get much better with the Easter egg either. I will say though, there is a positive here. It's not the worst Easter egg of all time, probably not even close to be honest. However, it's certainly not good either. It has a couple of cool steps such as the fuel processing lockdown which can get pretty hectic, but the best is easily the final escort step before the boss fight. This actually feels different and much more like a classic Easter egg step even if it's not that difficult. But I'm sorry, a couple of fairly decent steps across the whole of a map's Easter egg is not enough to stop it being anything other than underwhelming. And worse, it's just way too easy. It's a common theme across the whole of Cold War that the main quests are quite clearly designed largely for a much more casual audience. But if you're able to jump into a zombies experience with little to no knowledge of the map and manage to complete the Easter egg on your first try, then it's just way too easy, it's that simple. If that's something that's honestly possible with a main quest, then to be honest, it probably doesn't even meet its goal of exciting a casual audience because it's very likely even they will manage to do it on their first attempt. And so why are they going to be jumping back into Forsaken where they've already accomplished what many people would call the main goal of the map? This is clearly a much broader problem with Cold War than just a Forsaken issue, where the Easter eggs, not including Toten of course, are just far too easy and offer very little challenge for people more familiar with zombies' main quests. And these kind of issues are also present with the map's boss fight. So who exactly is the huge climactic boss fight to wrap up Cold War zombies in Forsaken? Yeah, it's kind of in the name, it's the Forsaken. I feel like that's obvious, no? One thing I will say in favour of this final encounter is it's big, over the top, and comes across as a very grand conclusion. But outside of that, I'm sorry to say that it just doesn't reach the heights of what I would describe as a genuinely good COD Zombies boss fight. Is it better than Maschine? Yes. Is it better than Firebase Z? Yes, probably, but only just. But let's face it, that's not really something to shout about, as one of those isn't even really a boss fight and the other simply involves spraying the order repeatedly in the face until it's over. Very much like the map's Easter egg, it just doesn't offer a huge challenge to a large number of players, and for the supposedly climactic finale of the Cold War story, is that really good enough? Not in my opinion. I definitely don't want to sound like a huge hater, it's honestly not terrible and has some cool steps such as having to charge the cannons by eliminating zombies so you can damage the boss after wiping out his shields. But many fans would agree it's not a final encounter that they return to repeatedly because it's so much fun to do. It just doesn't have that major pull like many other great boss fights such as Terminus or 9. And the major reason for that is it is just ridiculously easy. If you thought the Easter egg was on the more casual side, then this fight takes that to the next level. As long as you know what you're doing, then it provides pretty much no challenge and can be completed in a matter of minutes. It truly feels like a shame that this visually impressive yet sadly disappointingly simple boss fight is the final fight to round off Cold War. But I suppose they did at least stick with a theme across most of the game, totally underwhelming boss fights. Fortunately though, the end of this encounter does actually lead to something very cool. It's got to be said that although there are many glaring issues with this map, at least the final outro cutscene that is designed to wrap up Cold War Zombies is good, tying off numerous plot lines, teasing things for the future, and even giving players an awesome reveal showcasing that none other than Edward Richtofen was the mysterious director all along. But once again, just like so many times with this frustrating map, this is kind of where the positives end. Now, it's not like the rest of the story for Forsaken is awful, it's not, it's just serviceable, it does exactly what you'd expect. However, I'm sorry to say that it offers some of the cringiest dialogue in COD Zombies history. Let me give you the best possible comparison that I can. This right here is heartfelt, engaging, and downright tragic character acting.
I have been witness to miracles and calamities. I want to be me. Someone who can also hard work.
And this is, well, I don't really know what this is right here.
This is not your world, Toten! You will not consume this world. Not as long as I am here. I am a good soul. This is the only way.
I appreciate that Aether is considered the peak of COD Zombies, and of course Blood of the Dead had some of the best voice acting in the franchise's history, but it doesn't really make this hurt any less. How can you take the conclusion to the first chapter of Dark Aether seriously when supposedly impactful cutscenes come across as this cheesy? I think also we can agree that although visually pretty cool, the reveal of Zykov actually being the Forsaken is a shock to pretty much no one, even if you're playing the map years after release with no prior knowledge. It just feels like a lot of the story in Forsaken and the supposedly shocking reveals unfortunately fall very flat. It's not necessarily that the story being told is awful, it's not. The Dark Aether is genuinely interesting and Cold War certainly set the stage for Black Ops 6. But the problem is the way in which the narrative is shown to players in this map is just really not good. It feels a lot more like a comedy B-movie than a truly serious, emotionally impactful saga, like we've had in previous versions of Zombies. Luckily this would of course take a much more serious turn in Black Ops 6, but in terms of Forsaken it definitely didn't meet my expectations and fell very short of the great setup that it was given with Mauer de Toten. It's no secret that Forsaken was considered a massively controversial final experience in the initial chapter of Dark Aether, with fans loving certain things about it whilst absolutely hating others. But it leaves us with one final question: is it truly the worst map in Cold War Zombies? In my eyes, Forsaken is very much a tale of wasted potential, and in many ways that is more frustrating than an experience that is just flat out awful. It possesses some genuinely brilliant content such as the map's wonder weapon, the Chrysalax, and the arcade token system, which are up there with the coolest things in the whole of Cold War. The tragedy is they're trapped behind a completely underwhelming and quite frankly poorly thought out experience. I believe it's no exaggeration to say that this map's layout could well be one of the worst in COD Zombies history. And even what's there in my opinion isn't even really fully playable. The space is split up into smaller sections that have to be accessed through various teleporters, which truly comes across as an extremely lazy feature, used to hide either a lack of care or shortage of time given to developers in order to finish the map to Treyarch's usually high standards. When you combine this with Forsaken's poor quality atmosphere, it unfortunately just doesn't offer much replayability and really does not match the top tier aesthetic showcased in many older classic Zombies maps and even other Cold War experiences. There are glimpses of something genuinely good in here that peek through at various points when playing, but as quickly as you see and enjoy them, they're gone, replaced by weaker content that has sadly not stood the test of time. There have certainly been many COD Zombies maps over the years that are far weaker than Forsaken, as it definitely does not descend to the depths of the most hated experiences of all time. But in terms of what's available in Cold War, is it really the worst map? I would have to say yes, absolutely, and it's not really even that close. With the wealth of content that Cold War gave fans covered in depth, it's clear that it varies massively in terms of quality. The highs and lows of this entry into the franchise were pretty clear for all to see. It started with a bang, going through constant ups and downs as the season went on, leaving fans confused as to how good the experience was as a whole. So there's really only one final thing to do, and that is to rank every single map and DLC available in Cold War. It seems pretty clear in my mind that Outbreak is definitely the weakest content added in the Cold War Zombies life cycle. It just didn't do enough to accomplish what it set out to achieve. It attempted to take the classic gameplay in a completely different direction, and although it managed to do certain things well such as boss fights, it ended up lacking in nearly every other area. I appreciate the attempt by the Treyarch devs to do something different, but sadly this DLC needed a lot more work in my opinion to be loved as the open world style mode it was looking to be. As for classic round based maps, next in terms of quality has got to be Forsaken. When you have to ask yourself what this map is loved for and the only real answer is the wonder weapon, it kinda tells you all you need to know. It has some other decent content with its arcade token system and pretty amazing spawn room, but outside of that it struggles in nearly every area. Although not a genuinely bad experience, when it's acting as the final conclusion of the Cold War season you can't help but feel it really wasn't good enough. But it seems reasonable to say that the game got off to a stronger start with Maschine. Bringing COD Zombies into the modern age whilst also giving fans a nostalgic throwback was a very smart move from Treyarch. And of course this experience came with a lot of great content for fans, from elemental wonder weapons to new enemies and a great atmosphere. In my eyes it was definitely lacking in certain areas which absolutely stopped it from going down as one of the all-time COD Zombies greats, but it was a fairly strong start to the season and things would get even better with DLC 1. Although it's far from perfect and quite clearly received a lot of hate from the community upon release, I actually don't think Firebase Z is anywhere near as bad as many fans make out. Again, like a lot of the content found in Cold War, there's no way it could be described as an all-time classic, but it does have some genuinely brilliant aspects to it. The Ray K84 and unique defense rounds are some of the best it has to offer in my opinion. Despite that though, it could definitely be improved due to the fact that it has some frustrating features which definitely stop it from being the strongest DLC in Cold War. But it's still an experience that I often go back to, and in my eyes it's way better than the community tends to suggest. There is, however, one thing that I can agree with most fans on, and that is the fact that surely Mauer de Toten has to go down as easily the best content available in Cold War Zombies. To me, it's not even close. Mauer is a genuinely top tier experience and has pretty much everything you could want in a Zombies map. From atmosphere to wonder weapon and even the Easter egg and boss fight, this experience essentially has it all. I honestly believe it's leagues ahead of everything else available in Cold War and even holds its own against some of the best of all time. It's probably not going to be landing in anybody's top 5, but it doesn't mean that it can't be hugely praised for being an absolute 10 out of 10 Zombies map. Most COD Zombies fans have accepted that Cold War was very much the first stage in a new direction for the series. It changed the game mode more than any other that had come before it, and there was no going back. Although it certainly won't go down as one of the best entries of all time and was heavily disliked by many, it did actually bring a lot of impressive content to the table and left a lasting impression which would absolutely affect future titles. Cold War will simply be remembered as a new beginning and a fresh era, the game which rebooted the series in the most insane way possible.